thanks everybody for coming to Julius Caesar to see Holly Murkerson's talk. We've seen the show and we're excited to hear what she has to say. I just feel like there should be some kind of introduction.
And thanks to Julius Caesar for hosting me and trusting me with the space. You guys are very generous with that. Just kind of let me come over and do what I wanted to do. A couple other people I kind of wanted to thank. Michael Milano included. Jessica Hyatt, my good friend Sayre, who's not here, she's in New York. Olivia Bathmaker, taking me some photos and helping me install. Great friends that I've chatted with about stuff and work and fantastic. Okay, so I have a little short reading that I'd like to do. It's not any more than 10 minutes. And then I'm happy to talk about the reading, we can talk about the show, questions, etc. Fans off? Okay.
Maybe the one in the hallway can just turn off.
That one's still on. That was okay.
If we get hot, we can turn it up.
We're getting very little from the recording. Okay, it works when I'm this close. So I just put it closer to you.
Okay, sure.
Medieval recording devices. Just speak into the screen.
Okay. Alright. So I have in front of me this tangible page, ink on paper. I can see breaks on the page, where one sentence stops and the next begins. Where lies the end and beginning of each paragraph. This page, however, will be made ephemeral through speech. You, as my listeners, can only follow the linear path that I lay out word by word. You cannot skip ahead of the cursor or turn to the next page. You cannot go back and pick apart my syntax. You can only follow my voice. Please be warned that I may get lost. When Alice and the Duchess are discussing the difference between mustard and birds, Alice states that it's a vegetable. It doesn't quite look like one, but it is. I quite agree with you, said the Duchess, and the moral of that is, be what you would seem to be, or, if you'd like it put more simply, never imagine yourself not to be otherwise than what it might appear to others that what you were or might have been was not otherwise than what you had been would have appeared to them to be otherwise. I think I should understand that better, Alice said very politely, if I had written it down, but I can't quite follow it as you say it. We are constantly locating ourselves. We become disoriented, and we seek out landmarks or other familiars. We look at the darkness of shadows, the position of the sun, and we attempt to make meaning and sense. There are a myriad of ways to find orientation. Sometimes we may need a map or a compass, or maybe just a smartphone, as it seems to be useful to see the bigger picture and find our speck on the map. There's a group of people called the Punkarau in Cape York, Australia, whose language constantly uses the cardinal directions to talk about things. To say hello is to ask where someone is heading, in which case you must always know which direction you are going. Because of they use language this way, these folks tend to have a constant sort of bird's eye view of their location at all times and in most any situations. And they're pretty great at their reckoning. It makes me wonder if it all comes down to language. Could we improve our navigational skills simply by describing where we are in relation to all the other objects and places in the world? Would it help us to have more directional words in our language, more than just north and south, east and west, left and right, up and down? Would we describe abstract concepts like time in terms of direction? And if so, would that change the way we think about these things? It's comforting to follow the edges of things, like a river, the coastline of a lake or an ocean, or maybe the tracks of a train. There is a reassurance that these paths will lead to somewhere. But what happens when we find ourselves in the middle of the ocean, with no land in sight, or on the reverse, landlocked with no bodies of water in sight? This is a territory of uncertainties, and it is here that we may begin to observe things that would normally slip below the threshold of perception. Maybe we begin to notice where light falls, and on what side of an object a shadow appears. We start to relate this to the direction of the sun. In the northern hemisphere, the south side of objects are pretty consistently bathed in light, and we may observe this, but what happens on a cloudy day? We are in this universe. We are in this galaxy we call the Milky Way, and we are in this solar system which contains the sphere we know as Earth. Below several layers of atmosphere, cardinal directions will now apply. We are in the northern hemisphere. We have decided that north means up, and we hold a compass with a magnet that points in that direction. Within the northern hemisphere, we are located in a part of the Earth that we have decided is west, and more specifically on a landmass that we call North America. This landmass is further delineated, and we find ourselves in part of that landmass called the United States. With to be united. We are located in Illinois in an area of land adjacent to a vast lake known as Lake Michigan and other states with which we are united. Within this state, sharing a border to the east with the lake, we find ourselves in a city called Chicago. More specifically, we are in a neighborhood to the west called Gulfwood Park, surrounded to the north and the south by 2 train lines on a street named Carroll and a building number 3311. Within this building, we are in a room on the east side of the building surrounded by these 4 walls. In this moment, we are all contained in this room, and we are each contained in our respective bodies. And yes, I just did that. We rely on borders, on named and delineated spaces, relationships, and limits, both physical and self-imposed, in order to orient ourselves. Many animals also rely on limits to locate themselves, and some species may use other senses, such as smell and sound, to register periphery thresholds and boundaries. If you were dropped into the middle of the ocean and told to paddle to the coast of Brazil, would you know which direction to start out on? What ocean are you even in? Without a name, how do you know that you're in the Atlantic or the Indian Ocean? A pigeon would be able to do this with ease for reasons we have yet to fully understand. However, as humans, we need to understand some kind of relationship between at least a couple of known things. I suppose that since we are on a sphere that is contained, you could potentially strike out in any direction, and so long as you remain consistent, you might eventually strike land and slowly determine where you are. Then the game becomes one of endurance. It's quite easy to get lost in the throng of language that constantly flows through your head, and for me, this seems especially true in writing. It's as though each thought is struggling for attention until it all becomes a cacophony. Or sometimes everyone is so quiet I can hardly hear any of them clearly. Though we do tend to think using language, our thoughts are often in a tangle, simultaneous, and usually in incomplete sentences. Choosing and forming words into sentences, molding those sentences into paragraphs is forming relationships. There is now a line to follow, to react to or against. Knowing that you are in the Atlantic Ocean and below the equator and understanding those relationships, you now have some sense about which direction to paddle. When a thought becomes crystal clear, does a voice in your head utter it louder than all the rest, as if spoken by a chorus? Does that thought suddenly make it clear which direction you will go? However, what does it even mean to know where you are? I suppose it is helpful to know where you are in order to get where you're going. But sometimes I don't even know where it is that I'm trying to get to, so maybe where I am in the present moment will help to determine which direction I may want to go. At any given moment, we are surrounded by an infinite number of virtual possibilities, but let me stress that these are virtual, and that part of determining where you are is also determining which of these possibilities are possible as well as impossible. And though goals are helpful, I don't see them as a destination, and the getting there is not a means to an end. Rather, the going and the getting slightly lost are ends in themselves. Of course, this is all just one big metaphor for understanding how we exist in the world. It turns out that my interactions and relationships with others has much more bearing on knowing where I might be in the world than some understanding of my exact location. Friends, family, and lovers become emotional compasses, and the needle does not always point north. Engaging in a kind of intimacy that requires you to understand that another person is equally as vulnerable as you, yet complete with an entire set of experiences that makes them wholly different from you, allows both for empathy and learning. I think I find my own relevancy in those that surround me. But for the exact reason that these compasses do not always point north, you cannot be 100% self-sufficient. You cannot always know where you are and where you're going. This is much messier territory, but it's not necessarily terrifying. Just as you might start to notice things around you that you might otherwise miss if you knew exactly where you were, I think that there is much we can observe from being uncertain of your bearings in life. I have a ballet instructor who always says you will learn more from falling out of a position or a turn than if you did it perfectly every time. I think this is true. And if you're feeling a little seasick, you can always gaze forward to the distant horizon. Just like the Pomperow people have what seems like an internal ability for debt reckoning in terms of locating, I have some friends that seem capable of an emotional debt reckoning. I think they might be the smartest people that I know. And I fully trust them to help me locate, despite the fact that the only major flaw with debt reckoning is that an error becomes cumulative. Since debt reckoning relies on a previously calculated state, if there is an error in this initial calculation, other errors will continue to grow, and you may wind up lost without really knowing it. But at least we'll be lost together.
First, if there's anybody who's, it's like there's a little bit more room over there and stuff. I don't know, people are just clogging. Sorry. Thanks. Holly. I was thinking, these cumulative arrows and like, it's like for me, there's this really like clear distinction between like a form of dead reckoning that involves a body, right? So it's like when you sort of help orient us here in the space, as now I know I'm facing east and I forget about it. It's like it's very hard for me to shake that. Whereas like in a text, I feel like the sequence of arrows really becomes something you kind of have to hold on to and sort of work back and sort of build up. That there's a place where there's a kind of a handoff when there's a body involved. And I guess I had this very odd experience of photographing your work and realizing that there were things about the focus, especially in the images, that to me were almost more powerful looking at the screen than they were in the space, because in the space I always felt very physically present, even when I was trying to engage the work on a sort of conceptual level. And so my question is sort of like, if it is a question, I'll try to put in a question mark at the end of it, is sort of about, it's like, is there a tension that you're trying to introduce here of making the body a kind of a complicated element in the space, like that it doesn't, that for me at least the show seems to operate mostly when like my body kind of vanishes and it becomes more of a mental picture, or it becomes a kind of like slightly more disembodied thing, because my body is such a constantly reassuring aspect of my presence. I think it's different when you're sitting at a desk, for example, and you're writing, because there's a certain kind of stasis there. It's like watching a TV for a very long time, and the edges of the TV start sort of blurring, and you're kind of in that space. But something about that tension, or do you think about the body in this space as a kind of a complicated presence, or is there something that's...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, my choices for painting the walls of 4 different colors had to do with, finding orientation physically, as well as conceptually, I think. But, the photos essentially are the same image. One's just more of an extreme crop, and I think that was, for me, some way of distancing the body within the space. And then the table itself is obviously this physical object that you can walk around, and it feels more like the present somehow, or maybe these are some kind of past. And so I think it is a complication. It's maybe like the body in the past and the body in the present at the same time. And I think I really wanted you to be sort of aware of where you were within the space.
It's kind of funny because if someone was talking about what you're talking about, you'd think that they were talking about sculpture and bodies and sculptures. It's kind of funny that it falls flat like this. And it's
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I haven't myself actually like tried to photograph anything in here. You've done it and Olivia's done it, so it's interesting to think about what it looks like through another mediated screen or something. And I imagine the focusing thing is weird.
Yeah, no, I think it's also like an element of like temperature, and like, it's like for me the space is extremely familiar, and like, the grooves in the floor. Like, there's all these things that really ground me. Whereas like at my desktop, like sitting at my desk, looking at my computer, like it's a much more sort of like fluid space in terms of my presence. It's like very easy for me to just sort of like vanish and just like be in the screen, or Whereas like here, it seems like even though there's this like the photo as a kind of like, it's a landscape, so maybe like a window, or like a place for you to like sort of leave the room. I think that there's still a kind of like here-ness to them that's complicated. Question mark.
Yeah, it seems like there are these places where things are questioning each other here, like blue is questioning the other blue, and everything's standing in contrast. And then when you put that like relational difference of the two things into a single image, that definitely makes it complicated, or it really changes what it would be. I think that's an interesting. It's impossible to have one image that could really deal with the difference between the same image. Yeah.
the flattening.
Yeah, and the sort of like the one image being two images, the same thing, like being so different, even though it's just cropped differently. Like it took me a really long time to figure out that was the same image. And that speaks so much, I think, to different people having these different perspectives or different ways of reading something or looking at something or seeing those two blues together. And so, like, when you're putting them into one image together, you're eliminating that space in between them somehow.
Well, I think also when you take a picture, like, you have to deal with a certain kind of focus that, like, we don't even really think about, like, when we're in space. Like, everything's kind of in focus, and, like, when the picture is out of focus, like, it's totally in focus, out of focus. You know, it's like I know where, like, I put my finger on it, I would never go up to it and, like, expect to sort of, like, reach through it, you know? Whereas in a photograph, there's a depth of field, you know, and so, like, this depth of field becomes, like, a trick of it, you know? Whereas, like, here, it's like, yes, there's a certain amount of, like, yeah, there's no sort of POV that would reconcile these two, but, I don't know, for me it was, like, very disorienting. And maybe partly it's what you're saying, you know, it's like something about reading or something about, like, being exposed to a text, like, being very different from, like, a physical dead reckoning of a space. You know, it's like even, like, there's something more sort of disorienting there, or sort of, like, groundless about it, you know, and
That's what I keep thinking about is I'm sort of calling it translation in my mind, but I don't think it's translation per se, but something about the cardinal directions and the locating in this way in space versus locating yourself in time of writing. Something I think about a lot is whether one writes one word at a time in a line, or whether you write, you know, a lot of people write, like, I always think about, I think it was Balzac that would have to write a sentence and then go for a walk around the block and then come back and reread that sentence and write the next sentence. That sort of, you know, if the first word isn't right and the second word can't be right, or that, you know, or do you edit, or do you write like a clump of words and then you go back and re-edit all of those as soon as you understand where that's going, and then sometimes, you know, eliminating the whole first page because you finally get to where you think you're going. So I guess it's a question really about like what kind of process of writing you engage in and how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I think the photos become this, like, larger metaphor for all the sort of excess that falls off of writing. Like, you know, it's like it is. It's as soon as, you know, I put this word down, this particular word next to this word, what other word could have been there instead? It's not there now, and, like, maybe that's where this goes. And, you know, all the other. Because I feel like when I write, I don't. I mean, I might know what the subject is, but I don't always know where it's going exactly, and it kind of meanders. But I think I'm really highly aware that the paragraph that I wrote before is actually directing me around the corner to the next place.
Right, the kind of words. Like if you were losing out of verbs, like how's that? Or
right.
So where is that color in them? Or
right, absolutely. And so yeah, it's like I think that the physical act of being like right in the middle of the process of writing and this like really inchoate space is great because it's like there's sort of all this potentiality. And it's like the one place you can sort of live with it all in a way. But then you still have to then make this thing that, you know, exists in the world and it becomes a tangible thing on paper or becomes an ephemeral thing through speech or choices have to be made eventually.
And a kind of necessity emerges.
Yeah.
I mean, which is something I feel like I've been, you know, it's been summer. I don't know if anybody else felt as like, I felt like dispersed and psychotic all summer long. You know, in a kind of awesome way, but just like, who the fuck am I? What the fuck's going on? Like, and I'm like dreading fall because it's going to go away and I would have to, but it was also maybe awful or something. And there's something really great about listening to you and being like, thanks, Holly. Like, you're just bringing everything to a necessity and a path. Where that's like the exact thing I hadn't done all summer long.
Yeah.
But it's like there's so much, like you're saying, excess that's gone. Like
right.
It's lost.
Yeah. And I think I resented that for a really long time about writing and language and how, you know, it has to lay out this path and you have to be on it and then there's something sort of concrete about it to me. And I think I hated like losing all of that stuff, all the extra.
Yeah.
You start from the surplus, you start from the active, sort of endless, sort of indescribable field that everything, as with drawing, right? You make a decision, every mark becomes contingent on the previous one until you realize, oh, there is a method, there is a path. Like, shit, I'm on it. But, yeah.
But hold on, yeah, wait,
But maybe that path over there was better.
Yeah, or the methods were like, maybe not melancholy too, but like wistfulness of the show for me. It's just a, like you're looking out a backseat car window. Like that is over there. You decided to be here because of this contingent previous decisions. Which I think is the beautiful, tenable thing I can hang on to about the show. Yeah, and that's the thing about the table too, that, I mean, to Diego's point, I think so interesting for me at least, is that intellectually, conceptually, it's so elegant, but I really like the sort of encumbrance, the obstacle of the thing in the room. I want to sort of encounter this panorama, step back from it, not be tricked into thinking it's a window because it's sort of wrinkling off the wall. Like I'm aware of it as a fact, an object. But the obstruction of a clean, elegant, sort of musical, intellectual thing going on by something like this that's beautifully made, but still like encounters a body in this way, waist level. That's both kind of erotic and kind of confusing when I'm trying to have this head game as with writing.
Can you remind me what the moral the Duchess draws?
Yes, I can.
Remind me.
She likes her morals. So the simple, the complicated version, as she says, would be what you would seem to be. And the more simple version is never imagine yourself not to be otherwise than what it might appear to others that what you were or might have been was not otherwise than what you had been would have appeared to them to be otherwise.
I mean, I think I don't really know how it's used, and I have no question, but maybe the question is asking you to then draw, like, if the moral is be what you would seem to be, like how exactly, where is that happening?
In here?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like I was using that more, if anything, to just sort of exercise this idea that speech happens in time and linear time. The nice thing about the written page is you have the ability to be, it's simultaneous. It's all those words exist there on the paper at the same time, and so you have the ability to like slow it down. And you know, as I'm sure we all know, when we're reading something a little more dense, you have to slow it down. You have to go back and reread. And I think I was mostly using that to exercise the fact that you can't do that. I mean, I can because I have it in front of me, but you guys are likely to get lost within that. And
We have to let it unfold at the velocity you give us.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I think there's something really different about, you know, like reading and listening and like writing, like, you know, at least for me, maybe it's, you know, it's like attention disorder, you know, but it's like reading is never, I could try very hard to, you know, keep it on a line, but it really, just by with every word, it sort of starts like zigzagging up and down. Whereas with writing, it's very different. You know, it's like writing really feels like much more, it needs to be grounded. You know, it's like you can get into this flight when you're writing, or at least I do. I try to, but there comes a point where you have to walk around the block and come back and just read what you wrote and like be like, is this it? Whereas with reading, I think you know, it's I'm happy to get lost and like not, you know, like that's why I like talking to people about things I read and they read, because it's like, oh, you know, we're
You
not,
understood that
yeah,
totally
different.
Yeah.
And the same, you know, it's like there is this thing, this rhythmic thing about listening to somebody read, but it's especially, you know, it's like I keep thinking like, oh, I want to ask Holly something about this, and then you keep going, and then it's like, oh no, that would be an interesting point, and then later maybe two of them could be combined, and oh yeah, that's the thing I want. So like there's always a certain kind of like entrance of something else, and then with reading, it's like, yeah, reading is much more like a chop, you know, it's like these things like they leave and they have to sort of really just be off, otherwise it becomes bad reading. You know, it's like, I don't know.
No, having to follow things in time, right? Like, and having to be wherever we are now in time. And none of us has, like, the perfect, unless you have, what is it, the Funes, does it mean the Funes and Memorias Borges story? The guy with the perfect memory who's completely fucked. Like,
Can't forget anything.
Yeah.
so if any of us have one of those memories, then maybe we could be mapping the conversation and refer to, you know, point X 5 minutes ago or whatever.
Right.
But
each letter within the grid. And what was so fascinating upon learning about that to me was they would often, the words would be right next to each other, no spaces. And so you have this jumble of language, you know, where we're used to seeing gaps and that our brains recognize and pause, and this word begins and ends. It's extremely difficult to read that silently in your head. And so it sort of forced people to read things out loud. And that was super fascinating to me, that they really understood, you know, that the body has this really inherent importance to the completion of reading, and how to make something even physical again. This thing that's like in stone then becomes really ephemeral. And I think that's like, again, that's where I'm like walking some line between the two a little bit.
So it's more kind of like a ground reference.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like more sort of like falling apart reference.
So,
Yeah, I mean, it's curious because there's a way in which, like, the grid being prepared for letters being put into it, letters that are going to be carved in stone, like extremely permanent, because there is no letters actually chosen. The field of like what you call virtual possibilities remains like perpetually open. So you have this kind of nice contrast or balance between like this implication that language is going to be totally permanent.
Yeah, and verbal, and then in its absence, it's like quiet, like this quiet potential. Sorry.
Yeah, no, no.
Yeah, like that's it. It seems. I mean, do you feel like this is a piece, if it's relating to language and spoken language in particular? Like, do you feel like it's how is that? How are you like? How is it verbalizing that potential without like what was it you said that when you write air, it's like you're making the choices and things are actualized, you know, or you said something, but yeah, what do you feel like the relationship is between that being an empty space, I guess, and the need or to verbalize when you're reading?
say that again.
Here, I have it on tape.
Like this, you can't. Yeah, like this. That this language doesn't. That it's written to be spoken. The relationship between that and then it's
It's emptiness.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I guess it just comes back to this like potentiality. I think for like I said, a long time, I fought with feeling that language is really this thing that ties me down, it's concrete, and you can't take it back once it's written, and it feels like it's in stone. And but I know that not to be true. I read tons of things that are really open and extremely malleable, even though they are in print or whatever. And I think this is like that was kind of a way to talk about that or state that without, I don't know, I guess see any kind of necessitation to actually have to use language in that.
I see it's like it's talking about a certain kind of organ, but not necessarily about. I mean, it's talking about its functions, or it's like, but it doesn't have to actually be a performed organ, not organ, like whatever, like.
Feels like it's just like keep indicating like pronoun. It's just like it or that. It's just a certain kind of insistence. I feel like not so much about like definition of something, but just like a certain insistence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's it's positioning on the writing table, on this space of like of labor, of this. It's a space that's constantly in flux. I think that's
not a published space.
Yeah.
It's a space of process.
It's a space of process, and I think that's why the blue is there. Maybe it's you're in the boat on the ocean. I'm not really quite sure where you are.
Yeah, and I think most specifically that's why it's reflective.
Yeah.
Like, the thing about like how do you know it needs speech or how do you know it needs breath? I think the invitation and the demand of this is that it picks up the thing that's in front of it. I mean, that's how you know it invites and demands you. I think I just went to see if I could fog the glass with my breath. Is that what you're supposed to do? Right? Like that's part of what it requires. So like that's part of what you understand helps you understand as an instrument or as an organ, the thing to be used or played. I mean that's too like, the thing I can't scratch into this. I pass before it, and it's implacable to my advances to my passing through things. Quite like what? Nice.
I think it's interesting also,
space in which it could become language or become spatial, which is so much about what's going on here and trying to orient and stay between the two. Which sort of leads me to, like, I think my biggest question is if you could talk about process in this, because there's a way in which I think we're talking about it as, like, which is how we talk about art, as though it was always what it is, right? As though it was a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
And I really don't like that. I mean, I'm loving this conversation, but in terms of people learning to become artists or something, the way that we treat art as sort of already made. So if you could maybe walk us through some process and some maybe some pitfalls or something.
Sure. Well, the photos came first. And I think those have kind of a longer history. These probably originated at some point in grad school and through like another process. I think I had this other project going on, had this detritus on the floor, and became interested in that, and that evolved into actually setting these things up and becoming still lives to photograph. Go ahead.
And the detritus was residue in a drawing practice on the wall.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was doing, this is really early on, I was doing these wall drawings, and so there's all this dust and everything that's falling down. And then they resurfaced at some point, I think later on, and I mean, I think I understood them to be important somehow, but I didn't understand what it was. And so these were first, and they belonged to a larger series, and I think initially, with this show, I was thinking, oh, I'll show a couple of them. And I think I knew I had this particular image in mind. And then thinking about the space itself, knowing that it didn't have any windows, there's sort of no reference to the outside world, I think is where then I was like, I want to then reference the outside world or reference where you are, or give you some sense of knowing where you are within the space. And so that's when I decided that I would paint the walls with 4 colors and reference the cardinal directions. And then Michael actually had an excellent suggestion for me to, in determining the color scheme, to actually go out and photograph surfaces. So that the color essentially does come from photography again. So I would go out to the east wall at dawn and photograph east-facing surfaces. So there's sort of a time of day involved, and that feels specific to a particular direction to me.
Can we just pause on that for a second? Because I think that's part of like what's interesting and confusing is that this is an east-facing surface, and you've painted that east, right? So you've sort of done this thing where the source, the thing with the object is being hit, right?
It flips, yeah. Because I think as I'm painting above the horizon line, I'm thinking about it as atmosphere.
Right.
So, sorry.
Totally.
That was awesome.
So the flip happens instead of it being, in the photograph, it's the surface opposite. It ends up being back to the source to then say, east. So east at dawn, north at noon, west in the late afternoon, and south at noon, I think, as well. And then it was somewhat of a subjective process deciding the actual colors. Like I literally went to pick my photos and went to the paint store and to paint chips and and so there's that. And then the glass came somewhere. The glass started by itself. I think I read this really excellent Anne Carson essay where she was talking a lot about the ancient Greek stone cutters and the poets and the grid, and that kind of started that particular piece. And for a while it existed on the ground, and then at a certain point I was like, oh, it needs to be on a table, it needs to be on a writing table. And so I made the table. I think that probably the very, very last decision that was made was the blue on the surface of the table. And so it's probably the last thing that I understood.
And then what was the writing?
This writing was sort of probably started when the show was being thought about, and then worked on more this month, I guess. But I had done some previous writing that
gives us some kind of orientation, but at the same time, doesn't tell us anything about where the sun is. Like, I have no idea where the sun would be in this situation. And then, even if we know the four cardinal directions, it doesn't really tell us that much information. Like, it gives us a certain, like, okay, that's north. That, you know, if I'm lost in the desert, it doesn't actually help that much, you know?
Absolutely.
It kind of does, though. You know what I mean?
If you know, like, that going north is going
Take you to
to
Vegas.
somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Otherwise, it's just...
that's that conundrum for sure. I mean, 'cause, yeah, if you, that's, you know, if you need a relationship usually to understand something, but if you don't know anything, I don't know. I mean, it was interesting when I was out, you know, taking these photographs, I started to notice things like, right, yeah, if you're in the northern hemisphere, you know, the south side of an object is going to kind of consistently cast a shadow. And I started to wonder, like, if I really had no idea where I was, if I would be able to sort of, like, think about, like, okay, where's the sun? Looking at an object, if I'd be able to figure out what's sort of north, and all of that sort of thing. But you have to know the this and the that. You have to know that you're in the northern hemisphere and in the Atlantic Ocean, in order for any of that to be useful. And that all just comes also because we've named it that arbitrarily, and we know what that is or something. But if you don't know what that is, does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I was suggesting is you've given us this, but not that.
Yeah.
Right? You've given us one half of the relationship,
Right.
and the other half is
Right.
totally unknown.
It might, yeah, like knowing that this is the east wall might not actually do you any good, except now you know that.
Right.
But
Which
you need to know that and something else.
seems really related to the drawing, the writing table piece also, because it's like you have this like striation that you're creating that explains what might be a potential relationship that you could create if you imposed certain things on it, but like with this way that you're talking about this space, you know, I don't know if it's one, like it's like you're suggesting how to fill in all of these things to create an experience of language or of space. That's not a question. I'm sorry, I keep
That's
thinking
okay.
I can turn it into a question and I can't. I'm lying to myself.
That's quite all right.
I know how you feel.
There might be something about this sort of tension between the singular space and the multiple possibilities, that even if we know what northeast, south, and west are, they're all different times of the day, so they're not even consistent. It's not even consistently like a representation of what this room would look like.
True. Right.
What those directions look like in the same context.
Sure. Yeah.
Would you mind talking about the way how you figured out the focus in the photographs, the process of
Actually
Yeah.
photographing. Yeah.
kind of working out the way how you wanted it, or maybe just the process of selecting the photographs that you actually took and how you worked on the focus and what was visible in which way.
Sure. Yeah, photographing dust is kind of hard. I learned a little bit, but I mean, it was just a matter of really kind of. I mean, this is a small kind of table still life that it's set up. It's on a mirror surface. It's like this big. So there's not a whole lot of like backing away. Again, I'm kind of relatively close to it. And I think it was just a matter of trying to open up the aperture a certain amount, but it actually kind of kept the depth of field fairly shallow. And I think I have at least two or three of this, and I think this is the one with actually the largest depth of field, and I think I was just kind of focusing somewhere probably around this. Yeah, opening up the aperture a bit. It was shot on a 4x5 camera, so I could make it.
Were there other options that you then sorted out?
Yeah.
What was the process of reflection and this process of finding this?
there's like this fictive element, you know, it's like north-south, like north is up, haha, like for South American, that's not so cool. But, you know, it's like they're all, I mean, even the idea of like focus as somehow representing a kind of mental process, it's so like conditioned by film and like, you know, it's like, it's so conditioned by us using these things as mechanisms for standing for something else that really has no sort of visual element to it or physical element to it, you know, and so there's this niceness about the lies, you know, it's like they're very functional lies, like they orient only provisionally, and you know, it's like or there's this orientation, this focus, but it's a stand-in for something that the operation of focus isn't even relevant to really. I mean, you know, it's like we use focus to somehow stand for, like when something becomes clear in your head and then other things become less clear. But even saying less clear is already kind of like using language in a way that, you know, it's like, it's fudging really what's really happening there. You know, it's like clarity becomes a stand-in for a certain kind of, you know, like presence and consciousness, you know, and so there's this, I don't know, I mean, I guess when Molly was talking about translation, I kept thinking of like, you know, again, like this organ or you know, the game of telephone, and like, you know, it's not the message, it's like we're really thinking about this kind of like vehicle of something going from one place to another, going from an idea to a text, the text being read, and then like that as like this sort of like range that's being sort of pointed to, or like my issue with the bodies being sort of like paradoxical in the space is like, right, like, well, we need this one paradoxical element in it for the two sides to come up with, you know, like, I don't know, I think of like the first telephone call or whatever, like, you know, and like it comes out on both sides and you're like, whoa, like this thing is transforming, but still, you know, it's like it's coming out as like sound stimulus on both sides, or going in one way and coming out the other. But it's a kind of like, you know, it's a total fiction, right? It's like the sound that's coming out of the phone. I mean, not that I understand anything about the mechanics of a phone, but it's vibrations that get somehow like reconstituted. You know, it's like this kind of, and so I think that the use of like media in the show seems to be a kind of like a reconstitutive element that only, you know, like only provisionally or only sort of like partly, you know, it's giving you the clues, and then, you know, a bit like the people in Australia or something, that like, you know, they're able to construct this very tight bird's eye view, but it's really made up of a lot of blind spots that are just sort of like, you know, it's like they know this, they know that, and then the map seems complete, but if it was a streaming video, it would have a lot of glitches in it. You know, it's like it actually is not that complete. It's just guessing, like, well, there would be something here, there would be something there.
Right.
You know? Which I like.
Yeah.
Question mark.
Totally. I know. When I was listening, when I found out about the folks in Australia, this language researcher went to, which you and I talked about, she went there, and you know, she's not only, I mean, because you literally can't get past hello without being able to understand where you are and then respond in an appropriate manner, which complicates things. And so I think she was having a really hard time, and there's this moment where she's like, you know, I was suddenly walking along and this funny thing happened. I suddenly, like, I saw this bird's eye picture, and I saw this little red dot like flashing on the screen and moving about, and she suddenly like understood where she was, and I think she had just been situated in their language for long enough for like that switch to happen. And it's so interesting to me that that's even possible.
Yeah, no, I think then to retract everything I just said, like there is this point where these fictions really do, or you know, fictions is a really harsh word, and maybe I shouldn't use it, but they totally shape experience, and experience I think is a kind of like biological phenomenon. You know, so like these things kind of, I mean, like the other research she did with like, you know, like asking Russians to remember the color of like a word, right? So it's like Russians have three names for the word blue. So like light blue is its own prukeshka, dark blue is abruka, like they have no correlation. And so like somehow, like the presence of language is really sort of like framing experience in a way that's kind of totally real, and you know, even if it's hinged on things that are sort of like, you know, oh, they're words, and words are not real things, you know, it's like they actually are kind of real. So.
Well, I mean, there's real as a telephone call, right? Like,
there's real as what is?
As a transatlantic telephone call. Like,
right.
The information you're receiving is not the information you expect. It's not data you can use, it's sound, but there's still something being transacted. There's still sort of experience being had that's embodied, ephemeral, and sort of traceable. It's not hello, how are you? It's the sort of garbled sound that you made, but that still sounds like that's what opens up the poetics of this. It's like it's lack of utility. To the point earlier about not actually being able to orient yourself really to the outside world. It's like, well, that's the art of this part. Like, if it had too much utility, if it actually was a compass, am I reading to use it too well to enter into the possible poetics of simple gestures?
That's exactly, just like if it had too much utility, it would be too much north, south, east, and west objective information, and I really appreciated at the end of your reading, you were talking about intimacy and relationship and like the other kinds of compasses that we use, and I think so much of our actual navigation has so much more to do with that, like, than it does with north, south, east, or west, or borders, or states, or anything. Like, I mean, it's, where are you going? I'll follow you.
Right.
Fuck, I hope you know where you're going.
But then where are you? I'm with you.
Right, exactly. That's right.
Like, when you said lost together, it's like, we're here.
Well, yeah, we're here.
Just like, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if Australians are happy.
Because we know where they are.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because their language is not about being located in relation to one another.
Right.
But rather to...
In physical space,
Right.
yeah.
They're actually more objective than we could ever hope to be.
They have coordinates.
Yeah. Coordinates.
Yeah.
My next question then is maybe much more... I mean, the reading that you gave ended there. I think it was really interesting to me, like, in terms of where your text took you, where the writing of that took you. It took you to a place really far from north, south, east, and west. Did you feel the pointing? Did you feel yourself clicking your heels and being like, uh-oh, like, now this is where I'm going?
A little bit. I mean, I think that there's maybe something. I mean, I think there's something about like my visual practice that's maybe doesn't sort of have that more emotional component to it, or that I don't know that side of it. I am really interested in, dare I say it, affect and and my emotional relationships. Not that those are necessarily the same thing at all, but and I think I was looking for maybe a way to start to fold that into my practice now, and so the writing seemed a natural way to go. Yeah, I don't know.
I see that, like, that way that you read it, not the writing itself, but the reading of it, to have some relationship to the photographs and the way that it's, like, filling out this, maybe not, maybe it's, but, like, it seems to me like it's activating this potential, or it's, like, the way that it's in relation to the object on the writing table, it seems like it's kind of like, out of necessity, allowing something to sort of expansively happen within that framework in the same way that these photographs are necessitating something that happens within this framework.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it? Were you thinking about it that way when you were deciding to do a reading with the table? Like, or are those two things not really related?
I think they're related. Yeah. I don't know if I can say how right now.
Do you feel like I mean, maybe I'm just trying to be really, but I don't know. I'm kind of thinking, my mind can't stop wanting to make that into something that is like a substrate or a structure for language to happen through.
Sure.
I think it was interesting to sit here and to have you be reading, because I really understood what, how evaporative hearing like those words, how evaporative those words became. Not a question. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Like as though like maybe I was sitting at that table doing this writing to then be read out loud in this room. No.
Yeah, maybe, or like maybe there's like, okay, I don't watch a lot of fantasy movies, but like maybe that's this like magical object through which all of our voices, it's like the structure on which all of our voices are coming through somehow when we're in this space together. I hope those words evaporated too.
No, they evaporated.
Yeah, wait, damn.
No, but that's awesome. Like opening up to this sort of experience of collectivity or contingency or
like sit at the desk to read or something
Right.
ridiculous. Like,
Right.
To use it.
Right. Because I think it's operated as a kind of metaphor, a kind of doubling for the language that can be produced in a space and that can't evaporate. Like it's been a kind of like, I mean, it's the same thing that you're saying, but like maybe like the way that one thinks of the Tower of Babel or something. It's just like it's an idea, and you hold it as like it's right. It's like a structure that you hold in your mind. But it's nice to have a metaphor for something that is the thing that it is. Or something. It's not a very
Or like it's not even just the reading. The reading made us all aware of it, but it's somehow the actual like vocalization, like any vocalization. Okay, no.
would activate the structure.
Is like what the structure is. The structure is like in your attempt to visualize this idea of any vocalization, of like any language coming out in the same way that this sort of coordinated space, like the images to me they're a necessity. They're like just they're one potential of an infinite number of things that could be visualized in this system that you've imagined or that you've created, which is like all space kind of encapsulated in this way.
I just feel like at the same time, and this might just be like the way you're talking about is so autobiographical, but then general at the same time. And for me, I'm thinking about it very autobiographically. Like I'm not from Chicago, but in Chicago, I always think east. East is always with me because it's the lake and we're flat, and you can see east as soon as you get like above the second floor of any building. And so I keep thinking like you'll never forget that. And so this show will always be this Chicago show that's right here in this time right now. But then once you get in that space, the longer you're in Chicago and the more you inhabit the space, the more they become very personal and things get filled up and you forget east, but only temporarily because then you're in your head. So that's how it keeps going like the snap for reality and then in my head and then the snap to reality and then in my head like back and forth like over and over again. Was that a question?
That's okay. Question? Are you sure? That's probably okay. We do have a question for you.
I have a really dumb question. No, it's just I just wonder, like you said earlier, like you made some dust drawing or something before you found this photo has some potential. So I wonder like how like the process. How do you feel like I'm just curious. Like you particularly chose like photo as a medium, and then you talked about like flattening and some other elements about photo. And how did you feel like those transition? Like how difference maybe between for you like difference between the drawing and photo maybe like your previous practice before you chose this medium.
The drawings were shadows. I was drawing big shadows on the walls, essentially.
Your shadows?
No, they were usually like architectural shadows almost, or shadows cast in spaces when I was reinserting them on other walls and other spaces, which I think is relatable to this now somehow, but I don't know how I went from that. God, that was in grad school. I think I was doing a bunch of shit. And probably not understanding a lot
burnt image of like the fact, and like it seems that there's much more focus on the thing casting, you know. I don't know if I can go further than that metaphor, but I like the whole idea that you're being given this and not that. And maybe the shadow would be the thing that would help you orient yourself if you had a compass. And, you know, okay, well now I know that's north, south, east, west. I know where I should be facing, where I'm facing.
There are reflections. It's funny, like reflections being really different than shadows. But like you did your photograph on mirrors, and you see these sort of moments of reflection, but a reflection isn't a shadow. It's interesting. And there's also the depth of this thing and the kind of that kind of reflective quality. I guess like if looking down into something and having that narcissus experience is totally different from seeing your own shadow and like Peter Pan and pulling off your own like just like those two ways of locating yourself. You see yourself or which that thinking about intimacy too in terms of say I think about times like when you look at somebody else's face long enough, you start thinking it's your face like that. These ways of do you know what I mean? Yeah, you really know. Yeah, of course you know what I mean. And the thing I wanted to, that I think is super interesting about the photos and really a very clear, simple decision that has just like befuddled me the entire time is that the larger photo is a smaller scope, like, and that the smaller photo is big. It's just so simple and it's just so fucking confusing to me. Like, you just go back and forth and back and forth, and I think there's something in that decision that's similar to the other kind of flips that you're making that is really pretty great.
Thank you.
Did you intend, I mean, speaking of having heard everything talked about, you orienteering yourself in space and directions and that sort of thing, did you intend for this space to be an existential crisis for an individual? Because looking at one photograph and orientating yourself in that direction, that color, and then all of a sudden turning directions and being focused in on the same image but in a different direction.
Crisis.
Because
Yeah.
personally, like, if the room was designed for an individual to come, like, which I kind of feel like it is, you know, not necessarily for the group, but for the individual, that becomes a problem for orienteering. Unless it's like you face this direction, you can see more of it, but it's a smaller picture. And then you turn and make the decision to look again, and you see a smaller picture, but more detail of the same
Right.
destination.
Sure. I mean, I think I probably, I mean, this is where I think during install it gets hard because you get so entrenched in what it is, and I just know what it is so much, and so it gets hard to remove myself and understand, or try to remove myself enough to understand what's going to happen to the viewer. And I think I understood there would be this like, wait. And the same with the walls, like I had this battle when I was installing. The colors were actually much lighter than they are now. And then I painted them darker. And then I freaked out. And then I thought, no, they need to be lighter again. Like, they're too fucking obvious. This looks like a bad like interior design job or something. And but then, you know, I went with it and I left them, and then realized that people were still kind of missing it. You know, they had to spend a lot of time in here, and I just noticed that the walls were painted or that they're different. And so I think I was looking at like the viewer recognizing those things as being a reward, maybe, less of a crisis, I suppose. But,
I mean, the crisis for me becomes like all of these contemplated elements. I mean, you've given us a horizon line, and you've told us where the horizon should be in the image by where you orientate it, you know, where you place that image on the horizon line. So it's like wherever those false horizon lines are, it's kind of like telling you, no, this is the horizon line because I told you with these colors and placing it there. Then also you have this reflected image in the grid to kind of like have it, you know, like
change, and there's no reality to where the horizon line actually is.
I gotta say, I got crisis too. Because also, and more so because it was reinforced by a word like dropped in the middle of the ocean. Lost. I mean, that's pretty much a quest. That's more than a little lost. So I was with you.
Yeah.
I think more failed animism, but I think that an attempted animism is still not failed, and therefore not a crisis, because it's here. There's something.
I'm with the crisis crowd. Well, there's something, it's like a problem, you know, it's like you have two conflicting, you know, things and you have to kind of reconcile them. And that's why I think, like, if it was more, you know, if there were words on the glass, like, if there was the shadow being cast, then there would be this, a clear orientation that then just has to be considered. And I think that removing this, like, fixed, you know, points, boils it down to this kind of hippocampus kind of function. You know, it's like it becomes the organ again, and not the actual, like, not a use of it, but like it as doing some work. You know.
It's the opposite of crisis for me, because it seems to me like the photographs, they're extremely important in the installation, but they're also kind of secondary to the table and to the experience of one side and the other side and the inside of it. And it seems to me like the photographs are more pointing at whatever else that could be on the walls that is being refracted through the experience of the table. And they're part of the series too. So you chose these particular ones as like your favorite note or something that you're hearing in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and like I think I mentioned it earlier, I was thinking initially, like, I want a couple of images, and I think the easy thing was like, I'll do this one, and I'll do this one. And then at a certain point, I think actually after I went and looked at the Barks show, it's at the Art Institute right now, I was like, oh no, I don't have to show two different images. Actually, I think that I can just distill one image and move the viewer's body a little bit differently that way, instead of taking you to two different places. Like, we can just go to one place for right now.
It reminds me of listening to the same tone on different instruments. Like hearing a violin note and then the same thing on a piano.
Oh, that's a great example.
I think I like that because I was thinking about how, well, I read the line from the two colors is a horizon line, and then it almost looks like you matched the horizon lines with the, or at least suggested that you matched the horizon lines in the photos, and it's really hard for me to find myself between the two because they're both sort of lined up together, flopping back and forth.
You know, another just to make me think that, like, these pictures are potential, like, de-installation, like this table gets burnt to bits, smacked, you know, it's like it has this, like, it's starting to resemble, like, yeah.
The aftermath?
That's what I'm bringing the idea.
The paint getting scraped off the wall or sanded off the wall. Yeah, that's interesting. That they're kind of like the deconstruction of the system that allows it to sort of be visualized.
Yeah, I get a lot of, like, yeah, it's like I picture, like, I don't know, some crazy music video where it's like this thing falls apart and then you know, it's like the coffee cup in Errol Morris's Thin Blue Line, you know, it's like it just keeps like coming back and going down. So there's all these sort of like, I think maybe the presence of color does it. Like it makes me, it helps me picture things in this way. It's like kind of animated and not sort of like physical me in the body, but like I sort of perform these functions in my, you know, in my head.
I think that's fascinating. Also related to what you said, I thought you said was really wonderful, in that if this goes away, it's that we lose any sense of anything else that's in the room. So this is almost like our snapping back to orientation or reality when you're actually pointing out the more your imagination
disregard all of that. Yeah. What's that?
It sounds like you're an optimist.
I am an optimist.
Well, it's like, there's something about images for me that are so cinematically dystopic or end of the world, but
Sure.
maybe that's not how everybody else feels about them. Like, I keep thinking, like, like, The Road or something, like,
Sure,
things
sure.
are burnt and fucked and shit. Like,
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
But also so small.
right.
It's not, I kind of sense that, but it's not like it's not as dramatic as when you say it that way.
But it's not like King Kong stepped on New York. It's not like King Kong stepped on New York. Or
No,
No,
no.
it's actually King Kong is just this tiny
No,
little.
but I think like you're talking about picking up this tiny debris and just kind of whispering to you, and you're like, oh, this tastes glass, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you would, like there's
Yeah,
something.
I picture, like, sulfur and chemicals and things, like, dissolve. I don't know.
But yeah, I think it's totally this kind of like telescoping view, and then back to something that feels like it's intact. You know, it's like, and I think that's again, you know, like where like the body sort of comes, like the body sort of maybe brings things back, and then you get sort of lost, and you know, it's like you're disoriented or oriented. It still is a sort of like removal from a kind of physical sense or something, and then somehow you get the picture of the table whole again. You know, it's like you get the idea or something. You get something that feels like you can actually see all the parts of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think that. I mean, I think that saying you're an optimist is I mean, I want to balk at that. I feel like I don't think it's necessarily optimistic. I think it's experience that tells us that total destruction leads to creation. Like that we do come through things, and that when you get lost, you find yourself somewhere else, and that builds something really interesting. Like I think that's what you learn as an artist. It's like you're doing this. I know. I was just looking at this. There's somebody out there. I just think that like I don't think it's optimism. I think like we go into crisis as infants. If we made it past infancy, we've already experienced crisis after crisis after crisis, and like I don't know, like yeah.
No, totally. That's why I'm not in it myself. Nor do I find this terribly optimistic. Just like if you show me the bottom and it looks like when I drop something under my bed, then like okay, we're all right. Like I can't really. I don't know. I was sort of thinking, you know, Sarah saying dystopic, apocalyptic landscape or something. And she's like, well, yeah, but like I don't know. Ivan Albright's portrait of Ida, right? Just like whenever I see it, I'm super comforted. I'm like, okay, can it any worse?
Yeah, totally.
Right.
It's just the hair and the hairbrush. It's gross, but it's okay.
It's like picking up garbage after the revolution.
Is it?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems like, you know, like, I mean, it's not like after revolution, after
something big.
Yeah, after something big. Like,
Is that?
that's not what you meant?
Could the crisis be when you feel, because you used the word reward before, could there be a crisis, or do you feel like there's a crisis when you feel like you've reached a reward that then leads you in an opposite direction? Like as soon as, because that's the thing that I keep on feeling about this show, is that every time I'm realizing something, I'm actually wrong about that. Like landscape, no, not a landscape, but it is a landscape. And there's like a crisis in that, like I couldn't place exactly where they were. And I keep on thinking of the Tower of Babel, actually, which in that story there's these people trying to figure out to locate themselves and to figure out things about a history that is always alluded to them but never given, and then the burning of books and things like this. So it seems like in that way, as I go through this, I'm always feeling like I'm going to reach a reward, and then I see that there's not something after that, but it's only something that I can kind of find within myself. And then, does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I think that's really great. I mean, I think that's
Because it just leads right back to me once I feel like I'm about to find something, then I don't. Then I
Right.
become conscious of myself.
Sure. Yeah, I was reading this thing the other day that was kind of talking about, like we're historical beings, and so we look at things linearly and think about goals, and but
sort of generous, empathic, dialogic relation with the work. Like, nothing's being withheld. It's just not there. I mean, like we're being presented with the facts of the show. It's not like Alice really has this idea of what's going to happen to us, and I'm going to throw him at this whole crisis and then collapse into crying on the floor. Like, it's just, no, you're supposed to run back on your reasons because what's being provided is a provocation to think, and that's what it is to think.
Yeah, no, and that's what kind of makes the show so romantic for me, is it all, you were talking about emotion a lot in your reading, and it falls back onto something in a really unexpected way, to romanticism, in this belief that, an intellectual belief that your emotions can drive all your creative, or emotions of a driving force of creative energy. And yeah, I think that's not a question, but I think that's quite beautiful, that connection. At least that's the way I read it. That's the way I'm seeing it.
Yeah, I think, even being a crisis camper, it's a beautiful crisis. Happy. You know, it's like, I'm not really like, I don't take this anymore.
You guys are just painting photos on the wall. It's okay. Nobody's gonna drown. I promise.
I don't know if I see it as a crisis, or so much as like an interpretation of the crisis. And I think that in this interpretation, it's comforting. Like, I find it comforting. I feel like, oh, okay, like I can imagine you attempting to imagine these things that I am constantly in crisis about, my own dislocation, my own like inability to understand what's happening to words after I say them, my own inability to understand like how things are located when there is no such thing as a horizon. Like that's not the crisis that you're creating. I feel like that's the crisis that you're trying to speak to and somewhere like suggest,
share.
Yeah, share. Share it.
It's tough to share.
Yeah.
It's not speech. You're not supposed to speak.
Holly wants to share. She doesn't want to keep all of her crisis to herself.
No. Please, get lost with me.
Should we be wrapping it up, or am I think, do I have a bad sense of time?
No, I think you're...
I don't want to speak. Thank you. Okay,
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you so much.
We have an opening week from today, 1 to 4.
Stephen Husby.
Stephen Husby's Rubicon. We have cards. Please join us.